Chosen one, stop for a moment and listen carefully. There is a reason your life has felt so difficult to compare with anyone else you know. The pattern is not simply that things have been hard. The pattern is that the same kinds of doors keep closing at the exact moment you think you finally understand where your life is going. And that detail matters more than you realize. The algorithm may have placed this message in front of you, but the reason you are still listening is deeper than curiosity. Something in you recognized the shape of this before your mind had words for it. You have spent years trying to explain why your timing looks different, why your path refuses to stay predictable, and why ordinary advice keeps failing at the exact point where you need it most. This is not poetry. I am asking you to notice the pattern. Think about how many times you believed you had finally reached the beginning of the life you had been waiting for. A conversation opened, a relationship shifted, a possibility appeared, a door seemed ready to move, and for a brief moment, everything made sense. Then something changed. Not always dramatically. Sometimes it was one delay, one silence, one unexpected reversal, one person changing their mind, one opportunity that looked certain until it was not. What is strange is not how many doors have closed. What is strange is how often they have closed just before the same kind of turning point. The details change, but the emotional location is familiar. You get close enough to see the next chapter, but not close enough to live in it. And after enough repetitions, you start wondering whether the problem is you. You have probably asked questions you did not say out loud. Why does everyone else seem to get a map while I get fragments? Why can other people follow a simple sequence, make the right connections, remain patient, and eventually watch life respond in a way that makes sense? Why does my path keep forcing me into rooms where there is no clear instruction, no trusted example, and no one who can tell me what comes next? Those questions reveal how long you have been carrying uncertainty without a model. There were seasons when you tried to become easier to understand. You lowered your expectations, softened your instincts, stopped mentioning the things you sensed because people looked at you like you were reading too much into everything. You told yourself to be practical. You tried to become less sensitive to timing, less aware of atmosphere, less affected by the difference between what people said and what you could feel underneath it. But even when you silenced yourself, the pattern did not disappear. You noticed when a room changed before anyone admitted there was tension. You noticed when a connection looked right on paper but felt wrong in your spirit. You noticed when an opportunity offered more money, more attention, or more approval, but somehow required you to become smaller to keep it. You may have ignored those signals at times, but ignoring them never made them disappear. It only made you tired. That exhaustion has confused you because it is not always connected to how much you physically did. Some days you accomplished very little and still felt as if you had been carrying weight for hours. Other days you handled more than usual and felt strangely clear. The difference was often not workload. The difference was how much of yourself you were forcing to remain in places your discernment had already outgrown. And here is one detail we will return to later, because it changes the meaning of the word delayed. Every major delay in your life seems to have asked you the same hidden question. Will you accept a version of the future that looks familiar simply because it has a precedent, or will you remain available for something you cannot yet compare to anything you have seen? You may not have known that was the question at the time. You only knew that settling never gave you peace. Chosen one, there is a reason you have had so few people who could fully interpret your path. Some could encourage you, some could love you, some could even recognize pieces of what you carry. But when you reached the deepest questions, the advice became generic. because they were trying to guide you with maps created from their own experience. A person walking an old road can ask the people who walked it before. A person stepping into familiar territory can study the signs, copy the sequence, avoid known mistakes, and use somebody else as proof that the destination is possible. You have rarely had that luxury, and the absence of that luxury may be the first clue that your story was never designed to be measured by ordinary precedent. Do not rush past that. You have spent so much time interpreting the absence of a model as evidence that you were behind. You saw other people with mentors, examples, clear milestones, predictable progress, and you assumed their clarity meant they were favored, while your uncertainty meant you were forgotten. But what if those two things cannot be compared? What if a mapped path and an unmapped assignment require completely different forms of preparation? There is a difference between being lost and being led beyond the edge of what your old map can describe. Lostness produces confusion with no center. What you have experienced is stranger than that. Even in your confusion, there has been a quiet center inside you that kept saying, "Not this, not yet, keep going." You have learned what happens when you force an answer, because waiting becomes uncomfortable. The connection you knew was wrong becomes heavier. The opportunity you convinced yourself to accept starts costing more peace than it gives security. The room you fought to enter begins to feel too small almost immediately. Then you blame yourself for being difficult when the deeper issue is that your discernment recognized a mismatch before your logic was ready to admit it. One of the smallest signs in your story may be the one that makes the entire pattern difficult to explain by ordinary precedent. You have had moments when the option that made the most sense did not feel like the right one, and the option you could not yet justify would not leave you alone. That does not mean every impulse is divine. It means you have repeatedly been forced to learn the difference between impulse and discernment, between fear and warning, between impatience and genuine inner resistance. This is part of why you have become quieter. Early in the journey, you may have told people everything because you were searching for confirmation. You wanted someone to say, "Yes, that makes sense. Yes, I see it too. Yes, this is the right move." Over time, you discovered that some of the most important decisions in your life became clearer only after the noise of other opinions faded. If you truly were on the wrong road, why did the same inner signal keep returning after every attempt to abandon it? Why did certain ideas survive disappointment, distance, silence, and seasons when you had almost no evidence? Why did the desire change shape but refuse to die? That is not the final answer, but it is a question worth holding. There is something else you need to notice. The things that disappeared from your life were often not replaced quickly. A relationship ended, and there was no immediate new relationship. A role closed, and the next role did not arrive on schedule. A community stopped fitting, and there was no ready-made circle waiting to receive you. That empty space felt cruel because you expected replacement to be proof that the loss had meaning. You thought if something was truly removed for a reason, the reason should appear quickly. But some forms of separation are not about replacing one thing with another. They are about breaking the reflex that keeps you reaching for familiar substitutes whenever uncertainty begins. Chosen one, this is where the first layer of the message becomes clear. You are not being asked to glorify delay. You are not being told that every closed door is sacred, or that every difficult season came directly from heaven. You are being asked to look at the repeating pattern and recognize that your deepest turning points have consistently forced you away from imitation and toward discernment. People who are called to repeat a known pattern usually receive examples before responsibility. They can study what worked, improve what already exists, and build inside a category everyone understands. But what happens when the assignment itself does not fit cleanly into an existing category? What happens when the person keeps searching history for permission and keeps finding only partial parallels? That is the question underneath everything we are going to explore. Not whether you are better than the people who came before you, not whether you are more loved than anyone else. The question is why your life has repeatedly been stripped of the comfort of comparison, and why every attempt to force yourself back into a familiar blueprint has eventually failed. There is a point later in this message where that question will become much more specific. We will return to the delays, the closed doors, the strange timing, and the feeling that you have been living one chapter behind everyone else. And when those pieces are placed together, you will see why the absence of precedent may not be the evidence against you that you thought it was. It may be the first evidence of the thing you have been unable to name. For now, hold only this. A person following an old road usually knows where to look for proof. You have spent years looking for proof in people, timelines, patterns, and outcomes that were never capable of fully explaining what is happening in your life. And the moment you stop demanding that an unprecedented assignment produce familiar evidence, the entire story begins to change. You are not at the reveal yet. There is more that has to be understood before that truth can carry the weight it is supposed to carry. But you are close enough now to see the first fracture in the old interpretation. Maybe the reason your life has been so difficult to compare is not that you missed the pattern. Maybe the pattern you keep searching for did not exist before you. Chosen one, there is a difference between being abandoned and being taken beyond the edge of an old map. Those two experiences can feel almost identical at first. Both can remove familiar people, familiar answers, and familiar signs of progress. But only one leaves behind that quiet inner knowing that says there is still something ahead of you. You have felt that difference in seasons you could not explain. Something ended, but nothing obvious came to replace it. A relationship changed, a role closed, a familiar circle no longer fit, and instead of immediate relief you found empty space. You called that emptiness a mistake because mistakes are easier to understand than mystery. There is a difference between isolation and being moved outside the range of an old pattern. If you confuse the two, you will keep returning to places that can only confirm the version of you that existed before this season began. Isolation says nothing is coming. Separation says something new cannot arrive in its proper form while you are still using yesterday as the measure of tomorrow. That is why your life has looked confusing from the outside. People saw you step away from something that seemed good enough and wondered why you could not simply stay. They saw you become quieter and assumed you had lost confidence. What they could not see was that your spirit had become less willing to exchange alignment for familiarity. One of the strangest signs in your story is also one of the easiest to overlook. The most painful losses were often followed by a period in which nothing obvious replaced them. Hold that detail, because later it will help explain why your path has never behaved like a simple sequence of loss, replacement, and reward. If this were only about removing what was wrong, why was the empty space allowed to remain long enough to change you? That empty space exposed what constant activity had hidden. It showed you how quickly you reached for outside confirmation when you did not trust your own discernment. It showed you which voices brought clarity and which voices made you question what you already knew. It also revealed how much of your old identity depended on being needed, understood, included, or approved. For a watchman, that lesson matters. A watchman cannot guard what is sacred while constantly turning around to ask the crowd whether the warning is valid. A spiritual warrior cannot move clearly if every decision must first be translated into language that makes everyone comfortable. You were not being trained to become cold. You were being trained to recognize the difference between counsel and permission. Yet each time you tried to force a return, something inside you resisted. Not drama, not panic, a quieter resistance that refused to disappear. The issue was never whether you could survive the old pattern. You already proved that you could. The issue was whether surviving it had become an excuse to remain inside it. Now I want you to hold something in your mind before we go deeper. Researchers studying how the human brain processes information have spent years examining why some people recognize patterns and connections with unusual clarity, while others feel mentally scattered even when they are trying hard to focus. Their findings do not replace faith, and they do not explain away what is sacred. They open another window onto a question spiritually sensitive people have struggled to name. We will return to that window later, but for now, ask yourself this. What if part of what you call fog is not a failure of character, but a problem of how the receiver is functioning? Do not answer that yet. The point is not to turn your journey into a science lesson. The point is to notice how often you blamed your character for experiences that may require a more precise explanation. You called yourself inconsistent when your clarity changed dramatically, depending on the environment, the people around you, and the kind of decision in front of you. There were places where your mind felt heavy, then you left and suddenly you could think again. There were conversations that seemed ordinary but drained your attention long afterward. There were seasons when you could pray, plan, write, and perceive with sharpness, followed by seasons when every simple choice felt crowded with noise. You interpreted those shifts as evidence that something was wrong with you because you had no better framework. But notice what stayed consistent beneath the inconsistency. Your clearest moments often appeared when you stopped performing for an audience. They appeared when you had enough silence to hear your own thoughts all the way through. They appeared when you were not spending half your energy translating your instincts for people who had already decided not to understand them. The part most people miss is not what you lost. It is what was repeatedly prevented from replacing it too quickly. Every time an old structure fell away, there seemed to be a delay before the next one formed. That delay frustrated you because you wanted immediate evidence that the previous loss had meaning. But if something new had arrived too quickly, you might have carried the old dependency straight into the new room. You might have found a new relationship and used it to avoid learning how to stand alone. You might have found a new community and outsourced your discernment again. You might have found a new opportunity and measured your worth by performance before your identity had time to settle. The delay interrupted that transfer. This is why your separation has felt more like stripping away than transition. You were not only losing circumstances, you were losing the reflex to use circumstances as proof of who you are. For a cycle breaker, that matters because you cannot break a pattern while depending on the pattern to confirm that the breaking is valid. There is another reason this stage has been difficult. You have been comparing your invisible preparation with other people's visible outcomes. You see their promotion, relationship, platform, connection, or clear next step, then use their sequence to judge your own. But you do not know whether their architecture has anything to do with your assignment. There is a question about the receiver that will make the rest of this message read differently once we return to it. If a person is being prepared for something without precedent, what must change inside that person before they can recognize an opportunity that does not look like anything they were taught to expect? This is where the story becomes deeper than motivation, because recognition itself becomes part of the assignment. The earlier version of you would have overlooked many of those things because you were trained to look for familiar evidence. You wanted large signs, immediate confirmation, and visible momentum. You wanted the path to announce itself in a way that removed uncertainty. But some of the most important movements in your life began without applause. This is part of the reason you became a watchman before you fully understood the word. You learned to notice what was changing before the change became obvious. You learned to sense when a pattern had reached its end, even while everyone around you was acting as if nothing had happened. You learned to protect silence long enough for clarity to form. That does not make every feeling a message. It does not make every delay sacred or every closed door a sign. It means your training has been moving you away from impulsive interpretation and toward tested discernment. You are learning to ask whether something produces clarity after the emotion settles, whether it asks you to betray what you know, and whether it leads toward peace or deeper confusion. And here is where many powerful people lose themselves. They receive enough discernment to leave an old pattern, but not enough patience to resist replacing it immediately. They mistake emptiness for failure and rush to fill it. They return to familiar structures because familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar possibility. This is why the next stage requires a different relationship with uncertainty. You do not need to glorify waiting. You need to stop treating uncertainty as automatic evidence that you are off course. Sometimes, the absence of a familiar pattern is the condition that forces a new pattern to emerge. Earlier, I asked you to hold the question of the receiver. I am bringing it back now because the answer will matter only after you understand why the old map keeps failing you. What we return to later is not another spiritual slogan, but a way of understanding why clarity itself can change when the condition of the receiver changes. And before that answer can land, you need to understand the full shape of the problem it is meant to address. So keep 3 questions open. Why was the empty space allowed to remain? Why did familiar replacements keep failing to satisfy you? And why has no human example ever seemed able to explain the whole architecture of your path? Those questions converge later, and when they do, the delays you resented will begin to look different. For now, understand this much: you were not separated merely so you could become independent. You were separated so you could learn the sound of discernment without the constant echo of borrowed expectations. You were not emptied so you could remain empty. You were emptied long enough to notice what you reach for when you are afraid. And the next thing we must examine is why God so often allows a person carrying an unfamiliar assignment to remain without a clear human model for longer than seems reasonable. Once you understand that, you will stop asking why nobody before you can fully explain your road. You will begin asking a far more important question: what kind of person must you become when the map you need has not been drawn yet? Chosen one. Now, we have to look at something uncomfortable. If you have spent years searching for proof in other people's stories, there are patterns in Scripture that resemble your path so closely that they can feel like complete explanations. Moses knew separation before assignment. David carried anointing before visible position. Elijah knew exhaustion after spiritual intensity, and Esther was positioned before the reason for that position became fully visible. Those parallels matter because they give language to experiences that otherwise feel random. They show that delay does not always mean denial, that isolation does not always mean abandonment, and that preparation can remain invisible before purpose becomes obvious. But there is something you need to notice before you turn any sacred story into a map. Every one of those stories may resemble your life up to a point, and then the resemblance stops. That stopping point matters more than most people realize. A testimony can encourage you without telling you exactly what your next step should look like. A biblical pattern can reveal a principle without becoming a script. You must reproduce scene by scene. The familiar part gives you courage. The unfamiliar part demands discernment. Think about Moses. The wilderness can help you understand preparation, obscurity, stripping, and the distance between calling and visible responsibility. But your wilderness will not reproduce his wilderness, detail for detail. You are not being asked to copy his route. You are being asked to recognize the principle without turning the principle into a prison. The same is true with David. You can understand what it means to carry something before the room around you recognizes it. You can understand the tension of knowing there is more in you while still living inside a season that appears ordinary. But if you try to make every conflict look like Saul and every challenge look like Goliath, you stop discerning your own life and start forcing reality into a borrowed script. Chosen one, remember the exact place where the similarity stops. That boundary is not evidence that the comparison failed. It may be the place where your own responsibility begins. If you only pay attention to what matches, you will keep trying to predict your future from somebody else's past. This is where discernment becomes mature. Not everything difficult is an attack. Not everything delayed is divine. Not every uncomfortable room is beneath you. And not every closed door is a supernatural sign. Maturity is not finding hidden meaning everywhere. Maturity is learning which patterns remain true after emotion has settled. Now notice what these stories have in common. They can explain why preparation may be long, they can explain much of what you have lived. But they do not explain all of it. If every precedent explains only 80% of your path, what is the remaining 20% trying to tell you? That is the question many people avoid, because the final 20% removes the comfort of imitation. It is easier to place a familiar label on your season than to admit that no borrowed label completely describes what is happening. The missing percentage is where your discernment must become stronger than your desire for certainty. Sacred precedent is meant to illuminate a principle, not erase your responsibility to think. It can tell you that waiting has happened before, that hidden preparation has happened before, and that difficult transitions have happened before. But it cannot make your decisions for you. This is why your path has felt both ancient and strangely new. And later, neuroscience will give us another language for examining that remaining 20%. Not a replacement for scripture, not proof of the sacred, and not a shortcut around discernment. It will simply give us another way to think about attention, pattern recognition, mental fog, and the condition of the receiver. The reason that answer comes later is simple. Information becomes useful only after you understand the problem it is meant to address. So let us return to the question that has been open since earlier in this message. What happens when the receiver itself is not operating at its clearest? Why do some environments seem to cloud you, while others allow your mind to become unusually sharp? We are coming closer to that answer now. But first, you need to understand why clarity matters so much when precedent is incomplete. If the road were already mapped, you could rely more heavily on established sequence. You could follow known steps, compare outcomes, and correct course using familiar markers. But when the map is incomplete, the quality of your perception becomes much more important. A person moving through unfamiliar territory has less room to confuse familiarity with truth. That is why mental fog has felt so personal to you. When you cannot think clearly, you do not merely feel less productive. You feel disconnected from your ability to recognize timing, evaluate people, and distinguish a true opening from a familiar distraction. Then you begin to second-guess what you sensed clearly only a day before. And then you blame yourself. You tell yourself that perhaps you are not disciplined enough, focused enough, faithful enough, intelligent enough, or consistent enough. You assume the problem must be character, because character is the explanation you were trained to reach for first. But before you turn every struggle with clarity into a verdict about who you are, there is an assumption that must be broken. The assumption is that if the assignment is real, clarity should always come automatically. If God called you, you think you should never feel foggy. If you are spiritually sensitive, you think every signal should arrive cleanly. If you are prepared, you think uncertainty should disappear. But you also have a nervous system, attention, memory, fatigue, habits, and a brain processing enormous amounts of information every day. Recognizing that does not reduce the sacred. It removes unnecessary shame from the human instrument through which you are trying to perceive what matters. It gives you a more precise way to understand why clarity can change. If every foggy season means God is silent, you panic spiritually. If every foggy season proves you are failing, you attack yourself. But if human perception can become crowded, fatigued, and poorly coordinated, you can respond without turning a temporary state into an identity. You can care for the receiver without confusing the receiver with the source. Think about how often simple quiet restored something that more analysis could not. A walk sometimes brought back an answer you could not force at a desk. Leaving a crowded conversation sometimes allowed you to recognize what had been bothering you. Those moments were not proof that effort is useless. They were evidence that clarity can depend on state, and state matters when you are carrying an assignment that demands discernment. A person following a known formula can sometimes compensate for low clarity by following instructions. A person moving through unfamiliar territory cannot rely on that in the same way. If perception is clouded, familiarity can start looking like safety, and novelty can start looking like danger. So the next layer is not about becoming more mystical. It is about becoming more accurate. It is about recognizing where inherited expectations, old fear, mental fatigue, and borrowed narratives distort perception. It is about giving yourself enough internal quiet to tell the difference between a warning and a wound reacting to something new. There is a reason this must happen before the larger revelation. If you are going to become the first in any meaningful sense, you cannot interpret every unfamiliar thing as a threat simply because nobody before you modeled it. You also cannot call every unfamiliar thing divine simply because it is new. Firstness without discernment becomes recklessness. The stronger path is narrower. You test what appears. You watch what remains true after the emotion fades. You pay attention to whether the next step requires integrity or performance, peace or self-betrayal, courage or desperation. You notice whether you become clearer as you move toward it, or increasingly fragmented. That is how sacred precedents help without controlling you. Moses teaches that preparation can be hidden. David teaches that visible recognition can lag behind internal formation. Elijah reminds you that exhaustion does not erase calling. Esther shows that placement can make sense only when the moment requiring courage finally arrives. But none of them can live your decision for you. None of them can tell you the exact person to trust, the opportunity to accept, the boundary to set, or the moment to move. Their stories can reveal principles. Your discernment must still meet your actual life. And that is the assumption we needed to break before going any further. You are not failing because no biblical parallel, mentor, testimony, or spiritual label explains 100% of your path. Precedent may have completed its purpose when it brings you far enough to recognize the principle and then releases you into responsibility. You thought the missing map proved you had wandered outside the plan. You thought uncertainty meant you missed an instruction everybody else received. But what if precedent was never meant to predict every detail? What if it was meant to teach you how God forms people, how courage develops, how waiting changes identity, and then stop before it steals the uniqueness of your responsibility? We are not at the answer yet. The remaining 20% still has to be examined from another angle, because something happens when a person carries an unfamiliar assignment through a receiver shaped by familiar expectations. Old categories can interfere with what the person is able to recognize. That is where the next movement begins. You have spent enough time asking history to tell you exactly what comes next. History can show you courage, obedience, restoration, preparation, endurance, and transformation. But it cannot hand you a picture of a future that has not taken its final shape yet. The part nobody else can fully explain may be the part you are being prepared to carry. That incomplete place is not empty. It is where responsibility begins. It is where discernment stops being an idea and becomes the way you move. And in the next layer, we will examine why a person can carry a real assignment, understand the right principles, and still struggle to recognize the opening when it finally arrives. Because before you can understand why you may be the first, you have to understand why the mind keeps searching for permission from what came before. Chosen one, there is a reason the search for proof has exhausted you more than the waiting itself. Waiting is difficult, but waiting while constantly comparing your life to somebody else creates a second burden. You are not only carrying uncertainty, you are also trying to prove that what you sense is legitimate by finding someone whose story looks exactly like yours. For years, you have searched for evidence in the most understandable places. You looked at people who succeeded before you. You studied how they started, who helped them, how long their preparation lasted, when their opportunity appeared, and what signs showed them it was time to move. There is nothing wrong with learning from people. The problem begins when learning quietly becomes permission-seeking. You may be searching for proof in the exact place where your assignment was designed not to have proof. That possibility changes the question completely. If your responsibility is simply to repeat an established pattern, then precedent can guide almost every step. But if your responsibility includes opening something that has not existed in the same form before, then the absence of a perfect example is not automatically a warning. That does not mean you should ignore wisdom. It does not mean you should reject counsel simply because you want to feel unique. True discernment does not need to despise precedent in order to move beyond it. It studies what came before, keeps the principles that remain true, and recognizes when imitation has reached its limit. This is where many chosen ones become trapped without realizing it. They know they are carrying something significant, but they keep requiring history to certify every next step. They ask for a story that matches perfectly before they allow themselves to move. When no perfect story appears, they interpret the absence as proof that they misunderstood the assignment. But look carefully at what that creates. If you need somebody else to do it first, before you believe you can do it, then the future is permanently limited to what the past has already demonstrated. Nothing truly new could ever emerge under that rule. Every breakthrough would require a previous breakthrough of the same kind, and eventually you arrive at an impossible question: who gave permission to the first person? That is where the logic breaks. Every pattern you now call established had a beginning. Every road you now call proven once had a first traveler. Every method, movement, ministry, discovery, community, or act of courage that later became normal once looked unfamiliar enough to make somebody hesitate Firstness always feels unstable from inside the moment because evidence accumulates after the first step, not before it. This does not make every new idea correct. Novelty is not authority. Being different is not automatically being aligned. But the absence of precedent cannot be your only reason for rejecting something, because by that standard, nothing unprecedented could ever survive long enough to become precedent. And this is why every time you ask, "Who did this before me?" the answer seems to make your footing less stable instead of more secure. You find someone whose story resembles yours, and for a moment you feel relief. Then you reach the point where their sequence stops matching. Their door opened sooner. Their support arrived differently. Their path became public, while yours became quieter. Then the comparison that was supposed to comfort you turns into accusation. You ask why their season lasted 3 years, while yours lasted longer. You ask why they found the right person before you did. You ask why their breakthrough had visible signs, while your preparation keeps demanding internal change. The answer may not be that you failed their formula. The answer may be that their formula was never yours. Chosen one. Hear that carefully. A principle can travel across generations. A formula cannot always do the same. Courage can remain necessary across thousands of years. Integrity can remain necessary. Patience, discernment, humility, obedience, and wisdom can remain necessary. But the external arrangement through which those qualities are expressed can change completely. This is why the watchman identity matters. A watchman is not valuable because the watchman repeats what everybody already sees. The function is to recognize a shift before it becomes obvious to the crowd. That requires respect for what came before without becoming dependent on what came before. You have already experienced this in smaller ways. There were moments when conventional advice sounded sensible but did not fit the actual conditions you were facing. People told you to push harder when what you needed was distance. They told you to hold on when something inside you knew the season had ended. At other times, they told you to walk away while you sensed that discomfort was not a signal to leave, but an invitation to mature. The challenge was never simply having advice. The challenge was discerning which principle applied to which moment. A rule can become dangerous when it is removed from context. Even good wisdom can distort a decision when you apply it to a situation. It was never meant to govern. This is the difference between a person who collects answers and a person who develops discernment. One keeps adding more voices. The other becomes increasingly precise about which voice belongs to the present moment. One searches for certainty through volume. The other learns to recognize coherence. And you have been learning coherence through loss, delay, contradiction, and silence. There is a very large difference between saying, "Nobody can do this," and saying, "Nobody has been assigned to carry it in exactly this form before." The first statement creates superiority or impossibility. The second creates responsibility. You are not being told that history contains no wisdom for you. You are being shown that history may not contain a complete copy of what you are being asked to become. That distinction protects you from two opposite errors. The first error is arrogance, believing that because your path is unusual, you no longer need wisdom, accountability, correction, or humility. The second error is paralysis, believing that because nobody can give you a complete map, you must remain where you are. Both errors remove responsibility. True firstness does the opposite. It increases responsibility. If you are going to enter territory where precedent is incomplete, your standards must become stronger, not weaker. Your motives must be examined more carefully. Your decisions must be tested more patiently. Your desire to be special must not be allowed to disguise itself as divine direction. That is why preparation takes time. Many people imagine preparation as God withholding a reward until they become worthy enough to receive it, but that interpretation can create endless self-punishment. A more useful way to understand preparation is capacity. Can you carry what you say you want without turning it into another place where old fear controls you? Can you receive influence without becoming addicted to approval? Can you receive provision without rebuilding your identity around money? Can you receive connection without abandoning discernment because loneliness is loud? Can you receive visibility without making the crowd your new source of worth? Those questions take longer to answer than learning a technique. This is why your preparation has often felt disproportionate to what you thought you were waiting for. You thought you were waiting for one door, but the preparation kept reaching into your relationships, your habits, your boundaries, your self-perception, your tolerance for confusion, and your need to be understood. You asked why so much had to change if all you wanted was one opportunity. Because perhaps the opportunity was never the whole assignment. Something in you had to become stable enough that the opportunity would not become another master. Something had to become quiet enough that applause would not overpower discernment. Something had to become whole enough that success would not simply give your wounds a larger stage. And this is where the next layer explains why the preparation has been unusually long, even while the visible result remains hidden. When the destination has no complete precedent, preparation cannot only teach you how to arrive, it has to teach you how to recognize what arrival looks like. That distinction is enormous. If someone tells you exactly what the destination looks like, recognition is easy. You compare reality with the picture and decide whether you have arrived. But when your assignment takes a form you have not seen before, recognition becomes more complex. You may walk straight past the opening because it does not look impressive enough. You may reject the right connection because it enters through an unfamiliar door. You may also chase the wrong thing simply because it resembles the success you saw in someone else. This is why some delays may have protected you from premature certainty. You were still learning the difference between what impressed you and what aligned with you. You were learning that a large door is not automatically your door. You were learning that attention is not the same as assignment and access is not the same as alignment. You were learning to recognize substance beneath appearance. There was a time when you might have accepted something simply because it looked like progress. You were tired of being still. You wanted evidence that your life was moving. Any invitation could feel like relief when you had spent too long wondering whether you had been forgotten. But relief and direction are not the same thing. Sometimes a wrong opening feels powerful precisely because it ends uncertainty. It gives your nervous system something concrete to hold. It allows you to stop asking difficult questions. It gives you movement, and movement can feel like confirmation when stillness has lasted too long. Yet later you notice the cost. Your mind becomes crowded. Your peace becomes conditional. You start performing again. You become busy explaining why something that looked so right is making you feel increasingly divided. A true opening may not always feel easy, but it should not require you to become dishonest about what you can clearly see. Chosen one, this is why your path has demanded more internal precision than you expected. The assignment is not simply asking whether you have enough faith to move. It is asking whether you can recognize what deserves movement. It is asking whether you can tell the difference between fear that resists growth and discernment that identifies misalignment. Those signals can feel similar in the body. Fear can create hesitation. Discernment can create hesitation. Old wounds can make you want to leave. Wisdom can also tell you to leave. Desire can produce excitement. Alignment can produce excitement. If you rely only on intensity, you will confuse them. So you are being trained to look deeper than intensity. You observe what remains after the first emotional wave passes. You notice whether clarity increases or decreases with time. You ask whether the decision allows you to remain truthful, grounded, and responsible. You examine whether you are moving because something is genuinely right or because you desperately need the discomfort of waiting to end. This kind of training is not glamorous. Most of it happens in ordinary moments nobody celebrates. It happens when you decline something that would have impressed other people. It happens when you stop explaining a boundary that does not need a courtroom defense. It happens when you admit that an option you wanted badly is no longer aligned with who you are becoming. No audience applauds that kind of growth, but that is often where the future becomes possible. You are being prepared to carry novelty without confusing novelty with chaos. You are being prepared to move beyond precedent without despising precedent. You are being prepared to become a cycle breaker without turning your family, your history, or your past into enemies that must be hated before you can become free. Because breaking a cycle is not the same as rejecting everything that came before you. A cycle breaker preserves what is healthy and refuses what is destructive. A cycle breaker does not need to rewrite every memory as darkness in order to justify change. You can honor what gave you life while refusing what reduced it. You can carry gratitude and boundaries at the same time. That balance is part of the preparation. Without it, firstness becomes rebellion for the sake of rebellion. With it, firstness becomes restoration. The person who opens a new path is not merely someone who does something unusual. It is someone who becomes capable of carrying a different pattern without reproducing the old dysfunction inside the new structure. Otherwise, the external form changes, while the internal cycle remains identical. You could leave one controlling environment and build another one around yourself. You could escape people-pleasing and become emotionally inaccessible. You could move beyond financial fear and become consumed by status. You could stop seeking permission and begin refusing all correction. That would not be freedom. It would be the same wound wearing a different identity. This is why God has been working deeper than the outcome you keep asking about. The visible blessing may matter, but the person receiving it matters too. If the blessing arrives before the internal architecture can hold it with wisdom, the thing you prayed for can become the environment where an old pattern grows stronger. Preparation is not punishment for being unfinished. It is formation for responsibility. And that formation has required silence, because silence exposes what noise can conceal. It has required waiting, because waiting reveals what urgency controls. It has required separation, because separation shows which parts of your identity depended on constant reflection from other people. You discovered who you become when nobody immediately validates the decision. That discovery was painful because at first the answer was unstable. You doubted yourself. You replayed conversations. You imagined every possible mistake. You asked for signs, then questioned the signs. You reached moments of clarity and then reopened the entire case because someone else sounded confident. But over time, something changed. The silence that once felt like punishment became less threatening. The absence of immediate confirmation stopped automatically, meaning no. You became more willing to hold a question without forcing an answer, simply to reduce discomfort. That is not passivity, it is strength. A weak mind often needs immediate closure because uncertainty feels unbearable. A trained mind can remain present while information is incomplete. It can observe without inventing certainty. It can wait without collapsing into helplessness. And now we approach a bridge that matters for everything coming after this. What you have been describing spiritually as discernment also depends, in part, on very human capacities for attention, integration, pattern recognition, memory, and decision-making. Those capacities do not create the sacred. They affect how clearly a human being receives, processes, and responds to information. When that human receiver is overwhelmed, fragmented, exhausted, or constantly switching attention, even a wise person can misread what is in front of them. This does not mean the assignment disappeared. It means the instrument trying to evaluate the assignment may not be operating with full clarity. And when you place that beside everything we have already discussed, two stories that looked separate begin to overlap. The spiritual story asks whether you can recognize an unfamiliar assignment without borrowing somebody else as your final authority. The human story asks what condition your attention and perception must be in for you to recognize anything clearly at all. That overlap will matter later. For now, do not reduce it to a product, a technique, or a shortcut. We are still building the problem carefully because solutions become manipulative when they appear before the listener understands what they are meant to solve. The deeper question is still identity. Who are you becoming when no complete template exists? Are you becoming reckless because you want to be different? Or are you becoming more careful because you understand that firstness carries weight? Are you becoming isolated because you believe nobody can teach you anything? Or are you becoming discerning enough to receive wisdom without surrendering responsibility? The distinction will define what comes next. Chosen one, you do not need to become obsessed with being first. That would miss the entire point. The goal is not to spend your life proving that nobody in history has ever experienced anything similar to you. The goal is to recognize that similarity does not erase uniqueness, and precedent does not have to become limitation. There are ancient principles beneath your path. There may also be a new expression of those principles that has never existed in exactly this arrangement before. That is why Moses can teach you without becoming your script. David can strengthen you without becoming your schedule. Esther can remind you that placement carries responsibility without telling you the exact room you are meant to enter. Elijah can remind you that exhaustion does not invalidate calling without turning every exhausted day into prophecy. You receive the principle and release the imitation. That is maturity. And once you do that, something changes in the way you interpret your long preparation. You stop seeing every extra year as proof that you are behind. You begin examining what became possible in you during those years that could not have been produced by a faster route. You became harder to manipulate through approval. You became less impressed by appearances. You became more aware of the difference between urgency and timing. You learned that some people can love you and still be unable to recognize where you are going. You learned that a closed door can hurt without becoming a verdict on your worth. You learned that loneliness can tempt you to negotiate standards you thought were settled. And you learned that clarity is precious enough to protect. Those are not small changes. They are part of the architecture required when a person cannot simply copy an existing map. This is why the next movement goes deeper into the question of the receiver. We are getting closer to the point where the sacred language of assignment and the practical language of perception begin to meet. Not because one replaces the other, but because a spiritual calling still has to be recognized and carried through a human mind. Before we reach that bridge, hold one distinction firmly. No precedent does not mean no wisdom. No precedent does not mean no accountability. No precedent does not mean you are above correction. It means the principles may be ancient while the expression is new. And if that is true, then the preparation you thought was taking too long may have been doing something much more precise than delaying your reward. It may have been teaching you how to enter an unfamiliar future without dragging an old identity into it. You are not being prepared merely to receive something different. You are being prepared to recognize it when it arrives. Chosen one, we have reached the point where two parts of your story begin to touch. Until now, we have spoken about assignment, discernment, precedent, and the pressure of trying to recognize a future that does not look like anything you were taught to expect. But recognition has another side. A promise can be near, an opportunity can be real, and a door can be open. Yet a person can still miss what is in front of them if the receiver is overloaded, scattered, or trained to search only for familiar shapes. A blessing can be very close and still remain almost invisible to a receiver operating from an old blueprint. That does not mean the blessing is hiding. It means recognition matters. If your mind expects opportunity to arrive through one kind of person, one kind of timing, or one kind of evidence, you can overlook something simply because it does not resemble the picture you carried into the room. This is why discernment has never been only spiritual language. It also touches attention, memory, pattern recognition, and the ability to hold several pieces of information without becoming overwhelmed. You have experienced this already. There were moments when something important was directly in front of you, yet you could not see it clearly until rest, silence, or distance changed the condition from which you were looking. At some point, the sacred story and the story of reception begin speaking the same language. One asks whether you can recognize what belongs to your assignment. The other asks whether the human system doing the recognizing is functioning with enough clarity to notice what is actually there. Neither question cancels the other. This is not an invitation to turn faith into biology. It is not a claim that every spiritual experience can be explained by the brain. It is simply an invitation to stop pretending that the condition of the mind never affects the way a human being receives, interprets, and responds to information. This is where another kind of information becomes relevant. Dr. Roger Sperry received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1981 for discoveries concerning the functional specialization of the cerebral hemispheres. His work became widely associated with understanding how the two sides of the brain can contribute differently to information processing. The important point here is not a simplistic left brain versus right brain slogan. The useful question is how coordinated processing can affect attention, integration, creativity, and decision-making. There is a discovery that does not replace faith, but it gives a different vocabulary to something many people have felt without knowing how to describe it. You can believe deeply and still feel mentally scattered. You can care about your assignment and still struggle to connect information, hold focus, or make a decision when too many signals are competing at once. The material behind the program we are about to discuss uses the language of whole brain activation and neural synchronization. It frames the problem not as a lack of intelligence, but as a loss of coordination. It also uses the contrast between childhood creativity and adult mental rigidity to explain why many people remember learning quickly and seeing unusual connections when they were younger, then later feeling as if that sharpness became harder to access. Before I tell you the name, hear why this distinction mattered to two ordinary people who tried the protocol. A woman from California had spent years praying, journaling, reflecting, and trying to force clarity through more effort. Her frustration was not a lack of belief. It was the feeling that she understood what she wanted to live from but could not consistently access a clear internal state. After using the audio protocol for a period of days, she described less mental congestion and greater ease in seeing decisions that had previously felt tangled. A man from Texas described the problem more practically. He had accepted a level of mental fog as normal while carrying work and personal responsibilities. He said it took too much energy to hold a thought, compare options, and finish one line of reasoning without reaching for another distraction. After using the protocol consistently, he described a stronger sense of clarity and coordination. Those stories come before the name because the name is not the point. The problem is the point. A tool only matters if it addresses something you can actually recognize. The team behind the program is led by Dr. Daniel Barone, a neurologist in New York City. The program presents an 8-minute targeted auditory sequence built around what it calls neural sync technology. The intended use is simple. Put on headphones, close your eyes, relax, and listen for 8 minutes each day. They call it the Genius Switch. The Genius Switch is presented as a whole brain activation tool, not as another generic brainwave track. That distinction matters because many people have already tried binaural beats, gamma tracks, meditation music, or frequency-based audio and felt little difference. The positioning here is that those methods address only part of the picture, while this program is designed around synchronization between the two hemispheres and broader neural integration. The protocol is passive. There is no requirement to memorize a mantra or master meditation. If you miss a day, the material says you simply return the next day. The Genius Switch is not for everyone. It is for the chosen one who understands that preparation is not only about the promise, it is also about the condition of the person who must recognize and carry the promise when it appears. It is for the person who is tired of treating mental fog as a moral failure and is willing to consider that clarity can have practical conditions as well as spiritual ones. The point is not that an audio track gives you an assignment. It cannot tell you who to trust, what door to walk through, or what God is saying to you. Its role is narrower. It is presented as a tool intended to support mental integration so that the receiver is not fighting unnecessary internal noise while trying to make those decisions. Now consider the cost structure. The product page compares this program with forms of neurofeedback that can cost hundreds of dollars per session and home equipment that can cost thousands. It also states that colleagues considered the program valuable even at $500. The listed price was $49. On the page associated with this offer, the stated price is $39. With lifetime access, the purchase also includes 4 digital bonuses. The first is a guided visualization from a creator associated with the Calm platform, focused on money, love, health, and happiness. The second is a smart grocery shopping guide with food suggestions and shopping shortcuts intended to reduce monthly grocery costs. The third is a classic manifestation book, more than 100 years old. The fourth is a printable infographic built around 5 habits intended to support an ideal future. The page also states that the purchase is covered by a full money-back guarantee and cites 18,456 users. Those numbers can provide context, but they cannot replace your judgment. The link is in the description and the pinned comment. If the tool belongs in this season, that is where you can evaluate it. If it does not, continue with the message, because the deeper revelation does not depend on a purchase. What has been arranged for you is not created by a checkout page. A tool may support the receiver, but the assignment remains larger than the tool. The current page lists the price at $39 and states that it may increase. If it is relevant, evaluate it while the current offer is available. If it is not, release it without guilt. And there is one warning more important than price. Do not let a tool become a substitute for the inner work we have already described. No audio sequence can establish your boundaries for you. It cannot make you honest about a relationship you have outgrown. It cannot force you to stop seeking approval. It cannot decide whether an opportunity fits your values. What it can do, according to the way the program is presented, is support the condition of the receiver. That is the trust bridge between this tool and the larger message. You remain responsible for the life you build, what you believe, what you test, what you accept, and what you refuse. The tool is optional. Discernment is not. The most important thing is not the tool itself, but why a person can spend years preparing and still fail to recognize the moment when preparation is finally being asked to become movement. That is where we are going next. Preparation can create an unexpected trap. You become so accustomed to waiting that waiting begins to feel safer than receiving. You become so familiar with closed doors that an open one creates more anxiety than relief. You become so practiced at surviving uncertainty that clear opportunity can feel suspicious simply because it does not match the emotional pattern you know. If the longest season was delay, delay can begin to feel like identity. If the longest season was isolation, connection can feel unsafe. If the longest season was scarcity, provision can trigger suspicion. Then the problem is no longer that nothing has arrived. The problem is that what arrives does not resemble what your internal map learned to expect. Chosen one, new responsibility does not always feel immediately comfortable. You may pray for visibility and then feel exposed when people notice you, or pray for connection and then want to withdraw when consistency arrives. Those reactions do not automatically mean the new thing is wrong. They may mean your internal map still reflects an older season. That is why discernment cannot be reduced to whether something feels familiar. Familiarity is often repeated exposure. A harmful pattern can feel familiar. A healthy pattern can initially feel strange. The question is whether the thing remains coherent when you examine it with patience, integrity, wisdom, and peace. And now the spiritual and practical sides of the message come together again. If the receiver is clearer, you can evaluate more accurately. If the identity is stronger, you can evaluate without begging every outside voice for permission. If the old blueprint loses its authority, you can see an unfamiliar opportunity without automatically labeling it impossible. This is how preparation becomes reception. Not through magic, not through one dramatic emotional moment, through the gradual alignment of identity, attention, discernment, responsibility, and action. The goal is not permanent certainty. The goal is enough clarity to take the next honest step. Maybe the years were not merely an empty corridor between promise and fulfillment. Maybe they trained you to recognize confusion, borrowed identity, urgency, and peace after emotion settles. And after everything we have covered about the receiver, the larger question returns with greater force. Why would you need this much discernment, this much separation from precedent, and this much preparation if your only assignment were to reproduce what somebody else already demonstrated? That is the question the next movement begins to confront. We are moving away from the mechanics of reception now and back toward the center of the revelation. The tool has been named, the practical bridge has been built. But none of that is the climax. The climax is why your path resisted comparison, why familiar formulas kept breaking, and why you could borrow principles but never find a complete blueprint. Do not answer by telling yourself you are more important than everyone else. Firstness is not superiority. Firstness is responsibility, without the comfort of imitation. Soon we return to the larger question of why you had to be the first. And when we do, the answer will not rest on a product, a feeling, or a dramatic promise. It will rest on the pattern we have been tracing from the beginning. The pattern of closed doors, incomplete precedents, separation, and preparation that reached deeper than the outcome. The pattern of someone who survived the absence of a map long enough to become capable of drawing one. That is where the message is going now. Chosen one. Now we have to confront the part of this journey that is harder to hear than any story about delay, opposition, or closed doors. You have already learned how to survive uncertainty. You have learned how to continue when nobody could give you a complete map. But survival created a habit you may not have noticed. You became so accustomed to looking backward for confirmation that part of you still asks the past for permission before stepping into the future. This is where the message becomes uncomfortable. You can believe that your assignment is different and still secretly demand familiar proof before you move. You can say that God is leading you into something new while continuing to ask whether someone else has already succeeded there. You can call yourself a cycle breaker and still use the old cycle as the standard by which every new possibility must be judged. That contradiction does not make you false, it makes you human. For years, comparison gave you a way to reduce uncertainty. If someone else had walked a similar road, you could study their sequence and feel safer about your own. But safety and discernment are not the same thing. A map can help you move. A map can also become a hiding place. The moment you require a complete map before taking any meaningful step, the thing that once offered wisdom begins limiting what you are willing to recognize. Think about how often this has happened in quiet ways. An opportunity appeared, and instead of asking whether it aligned with your values, your capacity, and the direction your life had been taking, you immediately searched for examples. You wanted to know who had done it before, how they did it, how long it took, and whether their result could guarantee yours. When the examples were incomplete, your confidence began to disappear. You called that caution. Sometimes it was caution. Sometimes it was fear wearing the language of wisdom. You do not fear failure as much as you think you do. There is another fear underneath it. You fear stepping into a place where nobody can validate the step for you in advance. Failure on a familiar road can still be explained. You can say the timing was wrong, the strategy failed, the market changed, the relationship was not compatible, or the plan needed adjustment. There is language available for the disappointment, but if you step into territory where no complete precedent exists, you lose some of those protections. Then the decision becomes more personal. You cannot hide behind a formula. You cannot say you merely followed what everyone else was doing. You have to own the discernment that brought you there. That level of responsibility is what your nervous system has sometimes resisted, not because you are weak, because responsibility without precedent feels exposed. There is no crowd standing beside you saying, "This is definitely correct." Chosen one, that exposure can make an open door feel strangely threatening. You prayed for movement while the door was closed. You asked God for clarity while nothing seemed to change. You imagined how grateful you would feel when the right opening finally appeared. Yet there were moments when something began moving, and instead of relief, you felt hesitation. You slowed down. You started examining details that had not bothered you before. You found reasons to wait one more week, ask one more person, gather one more piece of information, or receive one more sign. And that explains something you may have misunderstood for years. Some doors did not close because you were rejected. Some doors opened, and you became slower at the threshold. That is a very different problem. It is easier to tell yourself that the enemy blocked everything. It is easier to believe circumstances always prevented you from moving. That explanation protects you from facing the moments when an opening appeared, but your identity had not yet caught up with the opportunity. Again, this is not accusation, it is recognition. There were good reasons for your caution. You had been disappointed before. You had trusted people who did not protect what you shared. You had committed to situations that looked promising and later discovered conditions you had not seen at the beginning. Experience taught you to inspect the doorway. Wisdom should inspect the doorway, but pain can keep inspecting long after wisdom has already finished. That is where discernment and fear become difficult to separate. Fear keeps generating new objections because its goal is not accuracy, its goal is certainty. Wisdom can say there is enough information to take one responsible step, even when the whole future remains unknown. You have been waiting for certainty in places where only responsibility was available. There is no human being who receives complete proof before every important decision. There is no mature life in which uncertainty disappears completely. The goal is not to remove every unknown variable. The goal is to become trustworthy enough with yourself that uncertainty no longer automatically becomes paralysis. This is why the earlier work on the receiver mattered. A scattered mind can mistake anxiety for information. A wounded identity can interpret every delay as rejection. A person addicted to outside validation can hear 10 wise confirmations and remain trapped by one skeptical voice. Clarity does not mean every emotion becomes quiet. Clarity means emotion no longer gets the final vote. Chosen one, you have reached moments when you knew what the next honest step was and still hoped somebody else would tell you not to take it. Not because the step was obviously wrong, but because permission would have transferred responsibility away from you. If someone else said go, you could blame their advice if it failed. If someone else said stay, you could blame their caution for the life you never entered. But the season of transferring responsibility is ending. A watchman cannot spend the entire night asking the sleeping city whether what he sees is real. At some point, observation becomes decision. At some point, information has to become action. That does not mean acting impulsively. It means accepting that mature discernment eventually produces a choice. You can test the decision. You can seek counsel. You can examine the consequences. You can pray. You can sleep on it. You can ask whether it violates integrity, wisdom, or responsibility. But eventually there comes a moment when more information is not creating more clarity. It is only postponing commitment. You know that moment because the questions begin repeating themselves. You ask the same thing using different words. You revisit the same evidence. You reopen conclusions you had already reached. You search for another voice not because the previous voices were insufficient, but because you are hoping somebody will remove the weight of choosing. That weight is part of becoming the person who can carry what comes next. A person who creates precedent cannot be dependent on unanimous approval. If unanimous approval were required, every new road would die before the first step. Look at the pattern in your own life. Some of your strongest decisions were not the ones everyone immediately understood. They were the decisions that became clearer after you stopped defending them. There was something inside you that settled once the argument ended. You may have still been afraid. You may have still wondered what would happen, but the internal division became quieter. That is important. Fear and peace can exist at the same time. You can feel fear because the future is unknown and still experience a deeper coherence about the direction. The presence of fear does not automatically cancel discernment. In the same way, excitement does not automatically confirm it. This is why your training has become more precise. You are not being taught to chase whichever feeling is strongest. You are being taught to observe what remains when feelings stop shouting. And here is the blocker that has stayed hidden beneath much of your delay. It is not your nature. You were not born unable to move. You developed a habit of seeking precedent because too many years passed without a complete one. Habits can feel like identity when they have been repeated long enough. A person who has been disappointed repeatedly can begin saying, "I am cautious," when what they really mean is, "I have learned not to trust a good thing until it survives enough tests." A person who has spent years being misunderstood can say, "I am private," when part of that privacy is actually protection. A person who has waited for a long time can say, "I am patient," when part of that patience has quietly become fear of beginning. The distinction matters because Identity feels permanent. Habit can change. If you call the blocker your personality, you will defend it. If you recognize it as a survival pattern, you can thank it for what it protected and still release it when it no longer serves the present season. Your caution protected you from repeating some old mistakes. Your silence protected parts of you that were still forming. Your distance prevented certain people from having influence they had not earned. Your waiting gave you time to recognize motives that once remained hidden. Those patterns had a function, but a function can expire. The armor that protects a person in battle becomes heavy if they refuse to remove it after the battle has changed. The wall that keeps danger out can also keep connection out. The skepticism that prevents manipulation can eventually prevent trust. The ability to endure delay can become a reason to remain delayed. Chosen one, this is why the next chapter cannot be entered with exactly the same internal posture that kept you alive in the previous one. You do not dishonor your survival by changing. You honor it by refusing to turn emergency behaviors into permanent identity. There was a season when your assignment required you to withstand misunderstanding. The next season may require you to communicate clearly. There was a season when you had to step away from certain connections. The next may require you to recognize healthy connection without suspecting it simply because it feels unfamiliar. There was a season when you had to protect the seed in silence. The next may require you to plant it where other people can see it. That transition can feel dangerous because every new posture removes an old protection. Visibility removes some control over how people interpret you. Connection removes some control over whether you can be hurt. Opportunity removes the comfort of saying nothing has happened yet. Provision removes the identity you built around surviving scarcity. Responsibility removes the excuse that you are still waiting for someone else to make the first move. This is what many people misunderstand about breakthrough. They imagine the difficult part ends when the door opens. Sometimes the opening creates the deepest confrontation. When nothing is available, you can idealize what you would do if the opportunity came. When the opportunity arrives, fantasy becomes responsibility. Then the questions become real. Will you speak when people can actually hear you? Will you set the boundary when the relationship actually matters? Will you invest attention in what you said was important when distractions are still available? Will you accept support without turning support into dependency? Will you receive without apologizing for receiving? Will you act without waiting for everyone to agree? That is where identity becomes visible, not in declarations, in decisions. There is a reason God allowed your preparation to reach deeper than your ambitions. If all you needed was an external opportunity, many opportunities could have come earlier. But opportunity without internal stability can enlarge the very pattern you were meant to break. A people pleaser with more visibility becomes a more visible people pleaser. A person ruled by fear with more money can become more sophisticated at protecting fear. A person addicted to approval with a larger audience can become more dependent on applause. External increase does not automatically create internal freedom. Sometimes it amplifies whatever was already operating underneath. This is why your formation has touched areas that seemed unrelated to your prayer. You asked for a door and found yourself learning boundaries. You asked for provision and found yourself confronting self-worth. You asked for connection and found yourself learning solitude. You asked for influence and found yourself becoming less dependent on recognition. You asked for movement and were forced to examine why part of you was still waiting for permission. None of that was wasted. But formation has a purpose. Eventually, training must become expression. Eventually, preparation must become movement. Eventually, discernment must produce a decision. And you are approaching that line now. The question is no longer only what God has been preparing for you. The question is whether you will recognize the moment when preparation is complete enough for the next responsible step. Notice the wording. Complete enough, not perfect. Perfection is another form of delay when it becomes a requirement for movement. You will never eliminate every weakness before entering a new season. You will never understand every consequence before making an important choice. You will never have complete emotional certainty. Growth continues inside the thing you enter. The person who believes they must be completely healed, completely confident, completely prepared, and completely fearless before moving will remain in preparation forever. That is not humility. That is an impossible standard. You can enter responsibly while still growing. You can make a wise decision while still feeling nervous. You can receive support while still learning trust. You can accept visibility while still protecting your inner life. You can begin before every question has an answer. The issue is not whether uncertainty remains. The issue is whether uncertainty still controls you. Chosen one, this is the confrontation hidden inside the message. You thought the greatest battle was against what prevented the door from opening. But part of the battle has been against the internal rule that says an unfamiliar door cannot be trusted until the past approves it. The past cannot approve what it has never seen. History can give you principles. Wisdom can give you boundaries. Counsel can give you perspective. But none of them can eliminate the responsibility of being present in your own life. There will always be a final distance that you must walk without borrowed certainty. That distance may be only one conversation, one application, one refusal, one invitation accepted, one project begun, one boundary held. Ninth, one decision made before anybody knows whether it will succeed. This is how precedent begins, quietly, long before anyone calls it precedent. At first, it simply looks like one person refusing to betray what has become clear. That is why your current hesitation does not mean you are disqualified. It means the old survival system has reached the edge of its usefulness. It carried you through years when there was no map. Now it must learn that lack of a map does not require lack of movement. You are not being asked to become reckless. You are being asked to stop confusing excessive delay with wisdom. Wisdom knows when to wait. Wisdom also knows when waiting has become avoidance. There is a difference in the fruit. Wise waiting produces greater clarity. Avoidant waiting produces more complicated excuses. Wise waiting simplifies. Avoidant waiting multiplies scenarios. Wise waiting strengthens the next step. Avoidant waiting makes every possible step feel increasingly dangerous. Pay attention to which pattern is operating. You may discover that the answer you have been asking for is not absent. It has simply stopped changing. You already know what needs to be addressed. You already know which conversation cannot be postponed forever. You already know which environment requires a boundary. You already know which old version of yourself keeps appearing whenever the future becomes real. You may not know everything that happens afterward. That is different from not knowing the next honest step. This is where responsibility becomes sacred. Not because every choice is guaranteed to succeed, not because you can control outcomes, but because integrity requires you to respond to what is clear without demanding that the entire future become visible forced. The old you wanted a guarantee. The person being formed can move with stewardship. A guarantee says nothing can go wrong. Stewardship says whatever happens, I will remain responsible for how I respond. That is stronger, that is more mature, and that is much closer to the identity you have been growing into throughout this message. A chosen one is not someone protected from every difficult consequence. A spiritual warrior is not someone who never feels fear. A watchman is not someone who sees every detail of the future. A cycle breaker is not someone who erases the past. These identities become meaningful when they describe how you carry responsibility. You notice, you test, you choose, you adjust. You refuse to abandon integrity simply because the outcome is uncertain. That is the architecture of someone who can become a precedent without becoming consumed by the idea of being special. And now we are close to the deeper reveal, because once the blocker is exposed, the meaning of the missing precedent changes. For most of your life, you treated the absence of precedent as the reason to hesitate. You saw it as missing evidence. You saw it as a gap in the case. You saw it as the thing that prevented certainty. But what if you have been reading that absence backward? What if the lack of precedent is not the problem that must be solved before you can understand the assignment? What if it is part of the evidence that explains the assignment itself? Do not rush past that question. If you were meant only to repeat something familiar, why did every complete formula fail to hold you? Why did the closest comparisons always break at the most important point? Why did your preparation keep developing capacities that seemed excessive for an ordinary repetition? Why were you trained so heavily in discernment instead of simple imitation? Why were you forced to become comfortable with incomplete validation? Why did your life keep removing the very supports that would have allowed you to remain dependent on precedent? Those are not 5 separate mysteries. They may be one pattern, and the pattern points toward the answer we have been delaying since the beginning. You have thought the missing map was evidence that you had wandered too far. You have thought the absence of a perfect example meant you misunderstood what was happening. You have thought the long preparation meant you were late. But another interpretation is becoming possible now. Maybe the map was incomplete because the assignment includes something the old map was never required to describe. Maybe your preparation was not extended because you were failing. Maybe it was extended because copying was never going to be enough. Maybe the part of you that kept asking who has done this before was asking a question the assignment itself was designed to outgrow. Chosen one. The next movement is where that possibility stops being a suggestion and becomes the center of the revelation. We are going to return to the title, the closed doors, the missing precedents, the strange delays, and the responsibility that has been forming beneath all of them. And when those pieces finally come together, you will see why the thing you called absence may have been evidence all along. You are not being prepared merely to walk a road. Nobody explained well. You may be being prepared to become the reason someone after you will finally have a road to follow. Chosen one, now we are standing at the point where every thread from the beginning starts pulling toward the same center. The closed doors, the delays, the seasons of separation, the strange inability to find one complete story that explains your own. None of those pieces looked connected while you were living them, because pain rarely arrives with a diagram showing what it is building. You saw one delay and called it bad timing. You saw one relationship end and called it loss. You saw one opportunity disappear and wondered whether you had misunderstood everything. But when the same architecture repeats across different areas of a life, eventually you have to stop examining every event in isolation. There is a larger question underneath all of them. Perhaps the question is no longer, what has God done for you that he has never done before? Perhaps the deeper question is, why would God need someone who could not simply copy the person who came before? Why would a life require this much separation from comparison unless comparison itself would eventually become too small for the assignment? That does not make you superior to anyone. It makes the assignment different. There is a dangerous temptation in messages about being chosen. A person can hear that their path is unusual and turn difference into rank. They can begin imagining that first means greater, that unique means more valuable, or that having an unfamiliar assignment makes them exempt from humility. That is not where this revelation is going. A first person is not necessarily the greatest person. The first person is simply the person who has to walk without the evidence that later people will receive. That is the cost hidden inside firstness. The person who comes second can study what happened to the first. The third can study both. Eventually a pattern forms, language develops, mistakes become visible, and what once looked impossible begins to look understandable. But none of that exists for the first person. The first person has principles, but no complete procedure. Wisdom, but no guarantee. Faith, but no finished case study. And suddenly, the architecture of your life begins making more sense. Why did so many of your closest examples help for a while, and then stop explaining the next step? Why did the advice that worked beautifully for someone else sometimes become strangely ineffective when applied to you? Why did you repeatedly reach the edge of established wisdom and discover that the principle remained true while the method no longer fit? Because principles can be inherited. Precedent has to be created. Every piece we have traced so far begins converging here. Your isolation taught you to hear without constant social confirmation. Your delay exposed the places where urgency controlled your decisions. Your closed doors trained you not to measure worth by immediate access. Your incomplete comparisons taught you to extract principles without worshipping formulas. Your mental fog forced you to care about the condition from which you perceive and decide. Your hesitation at open doors revealed how deeply you had learned to ask the past for permission. Different lessons, one destination. You were being prepared to carry responsibility where imitation would eventually fail. Chosen one. Earlier, we discussed the receiver and the practical importance of clarity. If the genius switch spoke to something you recognize in your own experience, the information remains available through the link already mentioned. You can examine it for yourself without turning it into something larger than it is. It is a support tool for the receiver, not the source of your identity, and not the author of your assignment. Now let it return to the background, because what comes next cannot be purchased. It cannot be downloaded. It cannot be outsourced. It is the responsibility to move when no product, mentor, precedent, or outside voice can carry the final decision for you. This is where you begin to understand why the old version of your life had to become increasingly uncomfortable. You kept trying to fit yourself back into patterns that would have allowed you to remain understandable. You tried to become the person people could easily categorize. You thought perhaps the answer was simply to become more disciplined in an ordinary direction, more agreeable, more predictable, more willing to accept what everyone else called realistic. But every time you managed to fit yourself into one of those structures, something inside you started going quiet. Not peaceful, quiet, in the wrong way. Your discernment became dull. Your creative thinking contracted. You found yourself performing a version of stability while privately feeling that something important was disappearing. Then, eventually, the structure broke. Sometimes you left. Sometimes someone else closed the door. Sometimes circumstances shifted so completely that staying was no longer possible. And every time, you asked why the same thing kept happening. Now you can see another possibility. Perhaps the structures were not always evil. Perhaps they were simply too small to become permanent. There is a difference between a bad room and a temporary room. Some places were never meant to harm you. They were meant to teach you something and then release you. The problem began when you interpreted usefulness as permanence. A teacher can be right for one season without becoming your final authority. A method can solve one problem without becoming the law governing every future problem. A relationship can be meaningful without being permanent. A role can train you without containing the full expression of who you are becoming. Maturity learns to bless what was useful without forcing it to become eternal. This is another reason precedent became complicated for you. You kept wanting a permanent blueprint. God kept giving you temporary instruction. You wanted the whole staircase. You received enough light for the next step. You wanted the complete identity. You received one responsibility at a time. That process frustrated you because you interpreted partial information as withholding. But partial information forced something to develop in you that complete certainty never could. Attention. Discernment, adaptability, humility, the willingness to remain teachable even after yesterday's instruction stopped applying in the same way. This is what a pioneer needs, not someone convinced they already know everything. Someone capable of recognizing when the landscape changes. A blueprint only exists after someone has walked far enough to draw it. Before that, there are observations, decisions, corrections, mistakes, unexpected openings, routes that looked promising and led nowhere, small confirmations that only made sense later. The first person does not receive the blueprint as a finished object. The first person becomes part of the process through which the blueprint is formed. That is why your mistakes did not automatically disqualify you. You had been treating every wrong turn as evidence that you could not possibly be called to something significant. But people entering unfamiliar territory need correction precisely because unfamiliar territory cannot be navigated through memory alone. The question is not whether you ever misread something. The question is whether you became more discerning because you did. Did the mistake make you more honest? Did the disappointment teach you something about motive? Did the failed connection sharpen your boundaries? Did the closed door teach you the difference between forcing and persistence? Did the wrong opportunity clarify what the right one must never require from you? Then the mistake was not meaningless. It became information. Firstness requires a healthy relationship with correction. If you believe being chosen means being incapable of error, then every mistake becomes a crisis of identity. You hide it, defend it, spiritualize it. Blame someone else. Anything except learn. But if chosen identity means responsibility, correction becomes part of stewardship. A watchman can misread movement in the distance. The answer is not to stop watching forever. The answer is to improve how you see. A cycle breaker can reproduce part of the cycle before recognizing it. The answer is not to declare the whole process false. The answer is to notice sooner and choose differently. A spiritual warrior can become exhausted. The answer is not to pretend exhaustion proves strength. The answer is to recognize when rest protects the assignment better than performance. Firstness does not remove humanity. It demands a more honest relationship with it. Chosen one, there is something liberating about that. You no longer need to turn yourself into a flawless character in order to justify a meaningful path. You can be learning and still be moving. You can revise and still be aligned. You can admit that one interpretation was wrong without deciding that every conviction you have ever carried was false. That kind of flexibility is not weakness. It is one of the strongest protections against self-deception. Rigid people need reality to confirm what they already decided. Discerning people allow reality to refine what they believe. And if you are becoming a precedent, refinement matters. Because somebody may eventually learn from what you build. Someone may repeat what worked. Someone may avoid a pain because you were honest enough to document what did not. Someone may inherit language for an experience you had to survive without language. That is when firstness stops being about your ego. It becomes service. There is an enormous difference between wanting to be the first so people will admire you and being willing to go first so people after you do not have to enter completely blind. The first version wants recognition. The second accepts responsibility. The first says, "Look at me." The second says, "Use what I learned." That is the identity shift happening beneath this message. You were never being prepared merely to have a dramatic testimony. You were being prepared to make your testimony useful. And now the title can finally be paid in full. Chosen one, you were not sent into this season to find the precedent you could imitate. You were placed here to become the precedent someone else will one day recognize. That is the thing that changes everything. Not that God loves you more than every person in history. Not that no human being has ever experienced delay, isolation, discernment, fear, or transformation. Those things have happened countless times. What is unprecedented is the exact convergence. Your history, your formation, your gifts, your wounds that became wisdom, your specific relationships, your time, your environment, your decisions, the people your future choices will affect. No one has occupied that exact intersection before you. No one can. You are the first person in history to stand at the precise crossing of those variables because there has only ever been one life with your exact sequence of moments. That sounds simple until you understand what it requires. It means there is no complete historical copy to consult. There cannot be. There are principles. There are precedents in pieces. There are teachers. There are warnings. There are stories that illuminate sections of the road. But the final synthesis belongs to your responsibility. This is why trying to reproduce another person's life kept exhausting you. You were borrowing an answer designed for a different combination of questions. Chosen one, there is your reveal. God did not need to erase history to do something unprecedented in you. He only needed to create an assignment whose exact combination has never existed before. Your firstness is not based on being more important. It is based on being unrepeatable. And now something becomes clear about all those years. When you asked why, nobody could give you the whole answer. Nobody had the whole answer because nobody had lived the whole question. Sit with that. They could tell you what courage looked like in their life. They could tell you how they survived betrayal. They could tell you what they learned about patience, money, relationships, prayer, work, creativity, or leadership. All of that could help, but none of them could calculate the precise shape of your assignment because they were not standing where you stand. You kept treating that limitation as proof that you were alone. It was actually the boundary between guidance and responsibility. Guidance can accompany you to that boundary. Responsibility crosses it. This is why mature faith does not remove choice. It deepens the seriousness of choice. If every step were dictated so precisely that you could never make a mistake, there would be no discernment to develop. There would only be compliance with instructions. But the life you are entering asks for more than that. It asks you to carry principles into conditions that may not have a ready-made rule. It asks you to remain honest when incentives become complicated. It asks you to keep your values when visibility grows. It asks you to recognize healthy people without demanding that they resemble old people. It asks you to receive provision without letting provision become identity. It asks you to move without turning movement into ego. This is what your preparation has been protecting, not merely the blessing, the person inside the blessing. The person who has to remain recognizable to themselves after circumstances change. Many people pray for expansion without asking what expansion amplifies. If resentment is underneath, expansion can amplify resentment. If insecurity is underneath, visibility can amplify insecurity. If approval-seeking is underneath, influence can amplify dependence on applause. If wisdom is underneath, expansion can amplify service. If integrity is underneath, provision can amplify generosity. If discernment is underneath, opportunity can amplify purpose. This is why God has been working on what is underneath. You interpreted that work as delay because you were measuring progress only by visible outcome. But invisible architecture is still architecture. The foundation does not look impressive from above ground, yet everything above ground eventually depends on it. You were being taught not merely how to enter, you were being taught how not to disappear inside what you enter. That is a far deeper preparation. And this is where the words "chosen one" have to mature. Early in the journey, being chosen may have sounded like rescue. You imagined that the meaning was God would finally remove pain, vindicate you, expose everyone who misunderstood you, and give you the life you deserved. That interpretation can keep someone going through a dark season, but it cannot carry mature responsibility forever. Eventually, chosen has to stop meaning protected from difficulty. It has to begin meaning entrusted with something, entrusted with discernment, entrusted with influence, entrusted with the ability to break a cycle without becoming bitter toward those who repeated it, entrusted with a future that cannot be built entirely from resentment about the past, entrusted with freedom without using freedom to dominate, entrusted with clarity without turning clarity into superiority. That is a heavier identity. It is also a freer one. You no longer need an enemy in every chapter to explain why you matter. You do not need someone else to lose for your life to become meaningful. You do not need every person who doubted you to return and apologize before you can move. Your assignment can become larger than your need for vindication. That is one of the signs you are ready to become a precedent rather than simply a survivor. Survival keeps looking backward at what hurt. Precedent begins looking forward at what can now be built. This does not erase what happened. It puts what happened in its proper place. The betrayal becomes information about boundaries. The delay becomes information about capacity. The isolation becomes information about identity. The disappointment becomes information about expectation. The recovery becomes information someone else may one day need. Nothing has to be romanticized. Pain can simply be pain, but pain can still teach, and learning can become legacy. Becoming a precedent carries a responsibility much larger than receiving a breakthrough. This is where the next movement begins. Because if all this message gave you was the feeling that something extraordinary is about to happen to you, it would leave the most important question unanswered. What will you do differently because you understand who you are becoming? How will you recognize relationships differently? How will you handle provision differently? How will you make decisions when nobody else can certify them first? How will you respond when the thing you prayed for arrives in a form you did not predict? How will you carry an open door without worshipping the door? How will you let the people after you benefit from what you learned? That is resolution, not a dramatic moment where every problem disappears. A new way of meeting reality. Chosen one. The breakthrough is not only that the road opens, the breakthrough is that you stop needing the road to resemble someone else's before you can recognize it. The breakthrough is that comparison loses its authority over your timing. The breakthrough is that you can receive wisdom without handing away responsibility. The breakthrough is that you can walk through an unfamiliar opening without calling unfamiliarity danger. The breakthrough is that you no longer need suffering to prove you are chosen. You can be chosen in peace. You can be chosen in healthy connection. You can be chosen while receiving. You can be chosen while building. You can be chosen without constantly fighting for evidence that you matter. That may be one of the hardest adjustments of all. You became so skilled at locating meaning inside hardship that ease can sometimes make you suspicious. When something arrives without a battle, part of you wonders whether it is legitimate. When someone treats you with consistency, part of you waits for betrayal. When an opportunity is simple, part of you searches for the hidden trap. When provision appears, part of you immediately imagines its disappearance. Those reactions made sense in older seasons. They cannot govern the new one. The next phase of your life requires the ability to receive without inventing a crisis around reception. It requires you to understand that peace is not lack of depth. Simplicity is not always deception. A healthy connection does not need chaos to feel meaningful. An aligned opportunity does not need suffering to prove its value. Sometimes what is right can simply be right. That sounds obvious. But for someone trained through years of resistance, receiving can require as much courage as surviving. Now you know why the preparation had to reach this far. It was not only teaching you to endure absence, it was teaching you not to sabotage arrival. You cannot become the blueprint for something healthier if you reproduce the emotional rules of the old pattern the moment something new appears. You cannot become a cycle breaker while treating chaos as proof of authenticity. You cannot become a watchman while interpreting every peaceful horizon as suspicious. You cannot carry accelerated fulfillment if speed causes you to abandon discernment. The external season can change quickly. Your internal posture has to be ready to change with it. And that is what comes next. Not another proof that you are special. A practical shift in how you receive what is already beginning to become visible. The old question was, who has done this before? The new question is, what does integrity require from me now? The old question was, how do I know this will work? The new question is, what is the clearest, responsible step available? The old question was, why am I so late? The new question is, what did the delay teach me that I now have to use? The old question was, when will someone finally validate me? The new question is, what becomes possible when validation is no longer the entrance fee for action? That is how precedent begins to move from identity into behavior. And that is where we go now. You have heard the reveal. You are not searching for the completed blueprint anymore. You are learning how to live responsibly enough that a blueprint can exist because you walked. Chosen one. After the revelation comes a different kind of test. It is one thing to understand that you are becoming a precedent. It is another thing to live as if that understanding is true when ordinary life begins again. The first change may not appear in your circumstances at all. The first change is the standard you use to recognize what actually belongs in your next season. For years, familiarity had too much influence over that standard. If something resembled what you had already seen, you could understand it quickly. If a person behaved like someone you knew where to place them. If an opportunity followed a familiar sequence, your mind relaxed because comparison gave you a sense of control. But now, familiarity can no longer be the highest measure. Something familiar can be wrong for the person you are becoming. Something unfamiliar can be healthy. Something impressive can be misaligned. Something quiet can be deeply important. This is where discernment becomes practical. You begin asking different questions. Does this require me to betray what I have learned? Does this relationship respect the boundaries that took years to build? Does this opportunity increase clarity or force me to perform a version of myself I have already outgrown? Does this next step strengthen responsibility, or does it simply satisfy my need to feel that something is finally happening? The first thing that changes may not be the door in front of you. It may be the standard by which you decide whether that door deserves to be entered. That shift can make your life look slower for a moment. You may stop saying yes as quickly. You may take longer before calling someone safe. You may stop treating every invitation as evidence that the waiting season has ended. But this is not hesitation returning. This is discernment becoming cleaner. The old you needed movement because movement felt like proof. The new you can allow something to be available without immediately making it yours. That is freedom. You can appreciate an opportunity and still decline it. You can care about a person and still recognize that closeness is not wise. You can feel excited and still test what you are seeing. You can receive a blessing without assuming every benefit carries an assignment. This is what makes the next season different from the last. You are no longer choosing only from hunger. You are beginning to choose from identity. And that means some things that once looked like opportunities will begin to shrink as the new identity becomes clearer. Nothing about them may change externally. The offer may remain the same. The person may remain charming. The room may still look impressive. What changes is your ability to see the cost. You notice when an opportunity pays in visibility but charges in peace. You notice when a relationship offers attention but requires you to abandon boundaries. You notice when a role gives status but slowly disconnects you from the work you were actually formed to do. You notice when a quick solution depends on returning to an identity you already outgrew. In older seasons, you might have called those sacrifices necessary. Now you recognize them as information. Not every cost means no. Meaningful responsibility always costs something. The question is, what the cost is asking you to surrender. Time can be invested. Effort can be invested. Comfort can be surrendered for growth. But integrity is not an acceptable entrance fee. Neither is self-betrayal. Neither is permanent confusion. Neither is returning to dependence on people whose approval once controlled your decisions. Chosen one, this is where your old interpretation of favor also begins to change. Favor is not always the biggest room. It is not always the fastest result. It is not automatically the opportunity everybody else would envy. Sometimes, favor is the clarity to walk away before an attractive situation becomes an expensive lesson. Sometimes favor is seeing a pattern on the first repetition instead of the 10th. Sometimes favor is no longer needing the rejection to become cruel before you permit yourself to leave. Sometimes favor is having enough identity to receive a simple yes without questioning whether you deserve it. That last one matters, because while some things begin to look smaller, another possibility may start looking exactly the right size. Something you once dismissed as too ordinary, too quiet, too late, or too different from the picture in your head may suddenly become visible in a new way. You may realize that the connection you expected to arrive dramatically came through consistency instead. You may realize that the opportunity you were waiting for is not one giant leap, but a sequence of smaller doors that require you to participate. You may realize that provision is not always announced by abundance first. Sometimes it begins as one decision that stops the unnecessary leak. Sometimes it begins with a skill becoming useful in a new context. Sometimes it begins with an idea you almost ignored because it did not resemble the breakthrough stories you had been studying. The old blueprint taught you what success should look like. The new identity teaches you how to recognize what fits. That difference is enormous. When fit becomes more important than appearance, your decision-making changes. You stop asking whether everybody will understand. You start asking whether the direction remains coherent when nobody is applauding. You stop asking whether the opportunity looks large enough to validate your waiting. You start asking whether it can be carried with integrity. You stop using intensity as proof. You pay attention to consistency. And consistency is often quieter than drama. A healthy person may not create the emotional highs and lows you once associated with connection. A healthy opportunity may not require constant urgency to keep you committed. A healthy environment may not force you to prove your value every week. Peace can feel unfamiliar when chaos trained your nervous system for years. That does not make peace suspicious. It makes peace something you have to learn to receive. This is part of accelerated fulfillment that people rarely talk about. Acceleration is not always everything arriving at once. Sometimes acceleration is the removal of unnecessary loops. You stop spending 6 months deciding what you already know. You stop returning to the same person for a different ending. You stop rebuilding the same boundary after every apology. You stop needing 10 painful confirmations before trusting one clear pattern. That alone can change the speed of a life. A cycle breaker does not only break dramatic generational patterns. Sometimes the cycle is hesitation. Sometimes it is self-abandonment. Sometimes it is the habit of waiting until a situation becomes unbearable before choosing yourself. Sometimes it is confusing struggle with worthiness. When that cycle breaks, time is released, energy is released, attention is released, and that released capacity can finally move toward building. Chosen one, remember the practical tool mentioned earlier. If the genius switch resonated with the issue of mental clarity and the condition of the receiver, its role remains exactly what we established before. It is an optional support for attention and neural integration, not the source of your calling and not a substitute for discernment. If you decide to examine it, the link already mentioned is where the current information is available. Then return immediately to the larger truth. No tool can make this next choice for you. No audio can decide which relationship respects your future. No protocol can tell you which opportunity requires courage and which one requires refusal. A clearer receiver can support recognition. Responsibility still belongs to you. And now we arrive at another shift. You have spent much of your life asking, what is coming? The next season asks what you will do with what is already here. That can be a harder question because anticipation feels powerful without requiring action. You can imagine a breakthrough endlessly. You can pray about it. You can visualize it. You can discuss what you will do someday. But when something becomes available, imagination loses its protection. Now, a decision has consequences. Now, you have to choose. Now your calendar changes. Now, your habits are exposed. Now your priorities become visible. You cannot say purpose matters while giving every best hour to distraction. You cannot say peace matters while repeatedly reopening relationships that destroy it. You cannot say you are becoming a precedent while waiting for unanimous permission. You cannot say the cycle is broken while continuing to negotiate with the behavior that kept it alive. This is where identity becomes embodied, not through a dramatic declaration, through the next ordinary choice, the call you make, the message you do not send, the boundary you stop explaining, the work you complete before announcing it, the invitation you accept because it is aligned, not because it makes you look important, the opportunity you decline because it costs something you no longer trade. Those decisions look small, but a new pattern is built from repeated small decisions. And this is why the final layer of this message is larger than your personal breakthrough. There is another level we have not fully entered yet. What is happening in you does not end with you. If you truly become a precedent, someone after you receives something you did not have. They receive language. They receive evidence. They receive a warning. They receive an example of what happens when someone refuses to continue a pattern simply because the pattern is old. Maybe that person is already watching you. Not publicly, not dramatically. A child, a younger relative, a friend. Someone who notices that you no longer explain disrespect as loyalty. Someone who sees you leave scarcity thinking without becoming reckless. Someone who sees you receive healthy love without creating chaos to test it. Someone who watches you build slowly instead of performing success. Your decisions teach before your words do. That is generational legacy in its most practical form. It is not only money passed down, it is emotional language that did not exist before. It is a boundary that becomes normal instead of controversial. It is a relationship standard that prevents someone younger from accepting what everyone before them accepted. It is a different way of handling conflict, a different relationship with money, a different definition of strength, a different response to fear, a different understanding of what faith looks like when it is not mixed with self-abandonment. The cycle changes when the new pattern becomes ordinary. At first, breaking the pattern feels disruptive because everyone around the old pattern adapted to it. When you stop playing your assigned role, the system notices. The person who always rescued people begins saying no. The person who always stayed quiet begins speaking precisely. The person who always over-explained stops putting every boundary on trial. The person who tolerated instability stops calling chaos passion. At first, that can create resistance. Then repetition creates a new normal. That is how precedent becomes inheritance. One person does something differently long enough that the person after them no longer experiences the old pattern as inevitable. Chosen one, you may have thought your breakthrough would prove something to the people who doubted you. But vindication is too small to carry the meaning of what you have been through. If your future is built mainly to make somebody regret how they treated you, the past still owns too much of the architecture. You do not need to build a beautiful life as revenge. You can build it because beauty deserves to exist. You do not need peace to prove that someone else was wrong. You can choose peace because you finally know what chaos costs. You do not need abundance to humiliate anyone who underestimated you. You can receive provision because resources in responsible hands can become service, stability, generosity, and freedom. That is the larger identity. The old version wanted to be seen. The restored version wants what is built to be useful. This is why the sacred close cannot be merely a request for emotion. We are not approaching the end, so you can feel powerful for 5 minutes and return unchanged to the same decisions. We are approaching a seal. A seal means agreement. It means you stop negotiating with the interpretation that kept you trapped. It means you no longer call yourself late simply because your timing does not resemble someone else's. It means you no longer call yourself abandoned every time a familiar structure ends. It means you stop demanding a precedent before taking a responsible step. It means you accept that becoming the first in your exact intersection of history does not make you superior. It makes you accountable for what you build there. Before that seal, one identity has to be released. The identity of the person who is always almost ready, almost clear, almost healed enough, almost prepared enough, almost certain enough, almost waiting for one final confirmation. There will always be another piece of information available. There will always be another opinion. There will always be another reason to postpone a responsible step. At some point, preparation becomes avoidance if it never becomes action. You know where that line is in at least one area of your life. You do not need me to name it. You felt it when I said that. Before we close this message, There is one thing that has to be placed down completely: the old identity that needs endless precedent before it permits itself to live. You can respect history without living under it. You can receive counsel without surrendering authorship of your decisions. You can honor the people who came before you without reducing your future to repetition. You can be teachable without becoming dependent. You can be uncertain without becoming paralyzed. You can be chosen without needing to feel superior. You can become a precedent without needing the world to call you one. That last freedom may be the deepest of all, because when you no longer need the label to be seen, you can finally focus on the work the label requires. Build what is healthy. Protect what is sacred. Tell the truth earlier. Choose with clarity. Repair what can be repaired. Release what cannot. Receive what arrives without manufacturing fear around it. And leave behind something cleaner than what was handed to you. That is how a first person becomes useful to the second. That is how a private breakthrough becomes generational. That is how the road behind you begins becoming visible to someone who will not have to enter it completely blind. Chosen one, the revelation has already happened. Now the seal begins. Not as performance, not as pressure, as agreement between the identity you have recognized and the decisions that must now follow. Chosen one, a precedent is not proven simply because one person survives what nobody around them understands. A precedent becomes real when the person who comes after no longer has to pay the exact same price to learn the same truth. That is when pain stops being only personal history and begins becoming usable wisdom. That is when a cycle breaker becomes more than someone who escaped. You were never meant to carry every lesson only for yourself. Some of what took you years to recognize may become obvious to someone else because you learned how to name it. Some boundary that cost you tears to establish may become normal in the life of someone watching you. Some pattern that confused you for a decade may end in one generation because you finally refuse to call it normal. This changes the meaning of everything you have been through. The question is no longer only, what did this season do to me? The question becomes, what can now stop with me, and what can begin because I was willing to see clearly? That is a much larger form of restoration than simple vindication. A watchman does not guard only personal comfort. A watchman notices what has been entering the gates unnoticed and decides what will no longer be given easy access. In your life, those gates may be emotional, relational, financial, spiritual, or mental. The work becomes sacred when awareness turns into a different pattern. That is why the personal breakthrough now has to become legacy. If this revelation ends with you feeling powerful for a few minutes, then it has not completed its work. The deeper movement is, from "I survived this" to "the people after me will inherit something cleaner because I survived it consciously." Maybe your family normalized silence where honest conversation was needed. Maybe people stayed in harmful dynamics because loyalty was confused with self-abandonment. Maybe scarcity trained everyone to fear every risk, or pride trained them never to admit when help was needed. You do not have to condemn the people before you in order to interrupt what they could not interrupt. They may have carried what they knew how to carry. They may have survived with the tools they had. Compassion allows you to understand that without continuing the same pattern, honor does not require repetition. That distinction protects your heart from becoming bitter while you break the cycle. You can say, "This ends with me," without saying, "Everyone before me was evil." You can choose differently without building your identity around resentment. You can create a new standard without needing hatred to provide the energy. Chosen one. This is how generational authority becomes practical. It appears when you stop teaching people to tolerate what wounded you. It appears when you stop handing younger eyes a model of love that requires constant anxiety. It appears when you stop presenting exhaustion as proof that a person is worthy. What you stop tolerating today may become something your children, your family, or the people influenced by your life never have to learn how to survive. Sit with the weight of that. One boundary can become a new normal. One honest decision can interrupt a pattern that once looked permanent. This is why some of the choices before you feel heavier than their visible size. They are not only decisions about one conversation or one opportunity. They may be decisions about which pattern receives permission to continue through you. You are choosing what gets carried forward. The old cycle may ask you to keep the peace by becoming silent. The new pattern may require calm truth. The old cycle may tell you to rescue everyone before taking care of what you were entrusted with. The new pattern may require compassion with boundaries. The old cycle may tell you that struggle proves value. The new pattern may teach you that peace does not need to apologize for being peaceful. The old cycle may teach you to wait until disrespect becomes unbearable before acting. The new pattern may allow you to respond when the first clear pattern becomes visible. None of that requires drama. In fact, some of the strongest cycle-breaking decisions look almost ordinary from the outside. You answer differently. You stop chasing. You stop explaining the same boundary to a person who already understands it. Then something remarkable happens over time. Your nervous system begins learning that peace can remain without being destroyed. Your mind learns that a decision can be firm without becoming cruel. Your relationships begin sorting themselves according to the standard you consistently live. This is where the promise of accelerated fulfillment becomes more mature. Acceleration is not only receiving more things faster, sometimes it is no longer spending 5 years inside a lesson you can now recognize in 5 weeks. Sometimes it is no longer returning to the same doorway simply because loneliness made the old room look warmer than it was. That is recovered time. That is recovered attention. That is recovered life. Chosen one, before this message can be sealed, one old identity has to be placed down completely. Not your sensitivity, not your discernment, not the wisdom your difficult seasons produced. The identity that must go is the person who is always waiting for one more piece of permission before becoming responsible for what is already clear. That identity has many disguises. Sometimes it calls itself patience, while avoiding a necessary decision. Sometimes it calls itself humility, while secretly believing its own discernment has no value until someone more impressive agrees. Sometimes it calls itself preparation, while endlessly moving the starting line. You do not need to attack that old version of yourself. That version helped you survive periods when you did not yet trust what you could see. Thank the lesson, then release the posture. What protected yesterday does not automatically belong in tomorrow. Now bring to mind one place where you already know the next honest step. Do not choose the most dramatic problem in your life. Choose the one that has remained clear even after the emotions settled. Notice how quickly your mind tries to add another condition before action becomes allowed. Maybe you say you will act after one more conversation. Maybe after someone changes. Maybe after you feel completely confident. Maybe after circumstances become easier. You do not need complete certainty to take one responsible step. You need enough clarity to act without betraying what you know. The future can remain unfinished while the next step becomes clear. That is how a new path is actually walked. Place your hand gently over your heart if you are able. Let your shoulders lower and allow one slow breath to move through you. You do not need to perform anything in this moment. You are simply marking the difference between the identity you carried into this message and the responsibility you are willing to carry out of it. Think for a moment about what survived. Think about the years when you had no complete map and still kept searching for truth instead of surrendering yourself to numbness. Think about the doors that closed without destroying your ability to hope. Let gratitude arrive without forcing yourself to call every painful event good. You can be grateful for what you learned without pretending the pain was pleasant. You can honor your endurance without needing suffering to continue. You can respect the road behind you without turning the road into your permanent home. This is the grateful pause. Now release what does not belong in the next chapter. Release the need to be understood by everyone before you move. Release the belief that another person's timeline is evidence against your own. Release the habit of returning to familiar pain whenever unfamiliar peace makes you nervous. Release the need to prove that you are chosen through struggle. Release the fantasy that everyone who doubted you must witness your rise before your life can feel complete. Release the belief that firstness means superiority. Let firstness mean responsibility. Say quietly within yourself, I release the version of me that needs the past to approve the future. I release the need for a perfect precedent before I take the next honest step. I receive wisdom without surrendering responsibility. I receive correction without surrendering identity. I can learn without copying. I can listen without becoming dependent. I can move without knowing every mile of the road. I can remain humble while accepting that my exact assignment belongs to me. I will not confuse peace with emptiness. I will not confuse chaos with depth. I will not confuse delay with identity. I will not confuse unfamiliarity with danger. I am willing to become the precedent my next season requires. I am willing to build what I once needed someone else to show me. I am willing to leave behind a clearer road than the one I received. I am willing to let the cycle end without turning bitterness into the foundation of what comes next. Now become quiet for a moment. There is nothing more to prove inside this pause. Let the declaration settle beneath the emotion. A seal does not need noise in order to hold. The old identity does not need a dramatic funeral. It simply stops receiving authority over your decisions. When it returns with familiar questions, you can recognize its voice without obeying it. You can say, I understand why you are afraid, but fear is no longer writing the map. And after this silence, there is only one meaningful decision left. Will you continue living as the person searching for a road someone else already approved? Or will you live as the person willing to open a responsible road that someone after you may one day recognize? That decision will not be proven by what you feel tonight. It will be proven by what you repeatedly choose. If this message has given language to something someone close to you has been struggling to understand, you may pass it to them. If you want to remain connected to future messages like this, you may subscribe. And if this moment marked genuine agreement for you, you may leave a quiet amen in the comments, not as obligation, but as a simple record of the decision you made within yourself. The sacred seal is complete. Now there is one practical doorway from earlier that deserves its final place before we move into the blessing. Throughout this message, the image has been a road without a complete map, and we also spoke about caring for the receiver that must recognize the road. If the earlier discussion about mental clarity remained relevant to you, the Genius Switch is the optional tool connected to that part of the message. Its 8-minute neural sync protocol is meant to support whole brain integration, not replace prayer, discernment, responsibility, or the decisions only you can make. The current page lists access at $39, includes lifetime access and the 4 accompanying resources described earlier, and is backed by the stated money-back guarantee. The description and pinned comment hold that path if you want to examine it for yourself. There is no need to turn the tool into more than a tool. A key can support the opening of a door, but it does not decide where you are meant to walk once the door is open. And that is the final connection. Your path cannot be outsourced, but you are allowed to support the mind, habits, boundaries, and practices through which you carry it. What comes next is no longer about another offer or another explanation. It is about the blessing placed over the life that now knows the difference between searching for precedent and becoming one. Chosen one, the seal is not here to make the promise begin. It is here to mark the moment when you stop returning to the identity that needed someone else to go first before you could trust the next responsible step. Nothing sacred has to be forced into existence by your emotion tonight. The deeper change is that you are no longer measuring your future by a map that was never designed to contain its full shape. You have already heard the revelation. You are not valuable because nobody else matters. You are not chosen because history has been emptied of every person who suffered, waited, believed, built, failed, recovered, and tried again. You are first because no person in history has ever stood at your exact intersection of formation, timing, relationships, responsibility, gifts, wounds, decisions, and opportunity. That intersection cannot be duplicated, and because it cannot be duplicated, comparison can advise you, but it can no longer govern you. Let the silence here do something that more information cannot do. You have received enough explanation for one message. There comes a point when another argument only gives the mind another place to hide. There comes a point when insight has to become still enough to reach the level of decision. So do not rush. Notice what became quiet inside you when the need for precedent was finally named. Maybe one question that had been circling for years suddenly became simpler. Maybe you realized that you were not waiting for information at all. You were waiting for permission. And permission is the thing this season can no longer keep outsourcing. Chosen one, take one slow breath if you are able. Let your shoulders fall. Let the need to solve your entire future disappear for this moment. You do not need the entire road. You need truth about the step beneath your feet. That is enough. The old version of you believed clarity meant seeing everything in advance. The person you are becoming understands that clarity can also mean knowing what is honest now, even when tomorrow remains unfinished. That is not lesser clarity. It is mature clarity. You know more than you think you know about what no longer belongs. You know which patterns cost too much peace. You know which conversations keep returning because they were never truly resolved. You know which habits make your mind noisier. You know which environments repeatedly reduce you into an older version of yourself. You know where you have been saying later, even though the next responsible step has been clear for some time. There is no need to punish yourself for that. Recognition is enough to begin. What matters now is whether recognition becomes behavior. From this point forward, the evidence will not be the intensity of what you felt during this message. The evidence will be the way you choose when the old pattern presents itself again. That is where the seal becomes visible. When the familiar person returns with the familiar invitation and you notice the pattern sooner. When the familiar fear tells you to delay one more time and you ask whether waiting is producing clarity or merely extending avoidance. When an unfamiliar peace enters your life and you resist the urge to manufacture chaos around it, when something healthy arrives without the drama you once associated with importance and you allow goodness to remain simple. Those moments will tell you more about transformation than any dramatic declaration. A new identity becomes real through repetition. One clear choice, then another, then another. Eventually, what once required courage becomes normal. And that is how a cycle actually breaks. Not because one person announces that the cycle is broken, but because the behavior that kept recreating it stops receiving cooperation. The argument no longer gets the same response. The guilt no longer purchases the same access. The fear no longer receives the same authority. The pressure no longer creates the same automatic yes. The loneliness no longer sends you back to what already taught you why you had to leave. That is restoration, becoming practical. Chosen one, you are allowed to become unfamiliar to people who only knew how to relate to your old patterns. You do not have to become cruel. You do not have to become unreachable. You do not have to explain every change as a spiritual event. You can simply become more honest. A clearer no, a slower yes, a stronger boundary, a quieter mind, a more deliberate decision. A willingness to let people misunderstand what does not require their approval. Those things may look ordinary, but ordinary decisions repeated consistently can rewrite an entire family pattern. That is where your firstness becomes legacy. A person after you may never know the number of nights it took for you to learn what they will receive as common sense. They may never understand how difficult it once was for you to say no without guilt, rest without shame, receive without suspicion, or leave without constructing a courtroom argument for your departure. That is all right. The goal of breaking a cycle is not to make the next person admire how hard it was. The goal is to make the old burden less necessary for them. What took you years to learn may become somebody else's starting point. That is one of the quietest forms of generational blessing. A child grows up believing respect belongs inside love because you stopped normalizing disrespect. A younger person understands that boundaries and compassion can exist together because they watched you practice both. Someone learns that asking for help is not weakness because you stopped turning exhaustion into virtue. Someone discovers that faith and responsibility belong together because they watched you pray and still make difficult decisions. Someone learns that peace is not boring because your life stops presenting chaos as passion. Someone learns that money can be handled without fear or worship because you stop letting scarcity define every choice. Someone learns that success does not require losing yourself because you refuse opportunities that demand self-betrayal. That is how precedent becomes inheritance. You walk first. Someone else begins with evidence. You paid for the lesson in experience. They receive part of the wisdom without paying the full cost. This is why your story has to become larger than vindication. If all you wanted was for everyone who underestimated you to watch you rise, then your future would still be organized around their opinion. You would still be reacting to the past. You would simply be reacting from a more attractive position. Freedom is different. Freedom is when their disbelief no longer determines what you build. Freedom is when the people who misunderstood you stop occupying the center of the vision. Freedom is when your peace no longer requires an apology from someone who may never understand the damage they caused. Freedom is when success can become useful instead of theatrical. Chosen one. There are people who will never give you the closure your earlier self wanted. Let that be true. Closure does not always arrive through a conversation. Sometimes closure arrives through becoming a person who no longer needs the old conversation to go differently. You do not have to return to every locked door and demand an explanation. Some doors did enough by closing. Some relationships taught enough by ending. Some disappointments have already given you all the information they are capable of giving. You can stop interrogating the ashes. There is a future that needs the attention you have been spending on old evidence. Turn toward it, not with fantasy, with responsibility. There are things to build. There are people to love well. There are skills to strengthen. There are decisions to make. There is health to protect. There is money to steward. There is rest to honor. There are boundaries to maintain without constant speeches. There is work that can become excellent because your energy is no longer being drained by endless comparison. This is the part of becoming a chosen one that receives less attention because it is not dramatic. The sacred becomes ordinary enough to live. You wake up and make a better choice. You tell the truth earlier. You finish what matters. You apologize when you are wrong. You receive correction without turning correction into rejection. You protect your attention. You stop making every delay into a prophecy. You stop making every conflict into warfare. You remain discerning without becoming suspicious of everything. That balance is strength. A spiritual warrior who cannot rest will eventually confuse depletion with devotion. A watchman who sees danger everywhere will eventually stop seeing accurately. A cycle breaker who hates everyone connected to the old cycle can reproduce the same wound through another form. A chosen one who needs constant proof of being chosen becomes dependent on signs instead of character. You are moving beyond that. Identity is becoming quieter now, more grounded, less performative. You do not need to announce what you carry every time you enter a room. You can let the fruit speak. You can let consistency speak. You can let how you treat people speak. You can let the quality of what you build speak. The strongest authority often stops needing to advertise itself. And this is where you begin to understand the purpose of all that hidden formation. God was not only preparing you to survive a difficult season, the deeper work was preparing you to remain whole when the season changed. To stay humble when people notice. To stay discerning when doors open. To stay generous when provision increases. To stay honest when influence makes dishonesty easier to hide. To remain yourself when success offers you 1,000 new identities to perform. That is a different kind of protection. The person who can survive scarcity is strong. The person who can receive abundance without losing their center requires another kind of strength. The person who can survive rejection is strong. The person who can receive recognition without becoming addicted to it requires another kind of strength. The person who can survive loneliness is strong. The person who can enter healthy connection without abandoning boundaries requires another kind of strength. That is what the next season asks from you, not just survival, stewardship. And if any support, practice, tool, relationship, or opportunity has been placed in front of you, remember its proper place. It can support your clarity. It can strengthen a habit. It can offer perspective. It can help you carry responsibility more effectively, but nothing outside you gets to become a substitute for the identity and discernment formed through this journey. A tool remains a tool. A mentor remains a guide. A relationship remains a relationship. An opportunity remains an opportunity. None of them becomes your source. That distinction keeps blessing from becoming bondage. It keeps support from becoming dependency. It keeps provision from becoming identity. It keeps success from becoming worship. And it keeps you free enough to recognize when something has completed its purpose. Chosen one, this is the quiet maturity of the final seal. You can receive without clinging. You can love without disappearing. You can build without worshiping the building. You can lead without needing everyone beneath you. You can learn without becoming a copy. You can become a precedent without turning firstness into superiority. Now place one final sentence inside your heart. I do not need the past to repeat itself before I can recognize what is true in the present. Let that sentence remain uncomplicated. You can honor history. You can learn from scripture. You can listen to people who carry wisdom. You can study evidence. You can change your mind when better information appears. None of that contradicts firstness. Firstness is not stubbornness. It is not refusing correction. It is the willingness to carry responsibility when no complete copy exists. That is all. And because that is all, you can stop trying to make yourself mystical enough to deserve the identity. You can live it today in how you answer, in what you tolerate, in what you stop postponing, in what you build when nobody is watching, in whether your peace survives an invitation back into the old pattern, in whether you can receive something good without immediately searching for the reason it must disappear. This is the proof, not another sign in the sky, not another number on a clock, not another dramatic coincidence. Your choices, your consistency, your ability to remain aligned after the emotion fades. That is where the revelation leaves the message and enters your life. And if tomorrow feels ordinary, do not assume nothing happened. Most lasting changes begin quietly. A thought that no longer controls you. A message you choose not to send. A boundary you maintain without anger. A task you finally begin. A conversation you enter without abandoning yourself. A peaceful moment you allow to remain peaceful. These are small things until repetition turns them into a life. Then one day, you look backward and realize the road exists. Not because someone handed it to you, because you walked it. And behind you are footprints. Behind you are decisions. Behind you are corrections. Behind you are lessons. Behind you is evidence that was not available when you began. Someone else can see it now. Someone else can say there is a way through this. Someone else can avoid one mistake because you were honest about yours. Someone else can believe a healthier pattern is possible because you lived it long enough for it to become visible. That is the moment your firstness stops belonging only to you. Your story may end one chapter as the first person, but it begins again in the people who no longer have to start from zero because you went first. That is legacy, not fame, not worship, not being remembered by everyone. Legacy is usefulness that survives your moment. It is a healthier pattern that continues when nobody is mentioning your name. It is wisdom that becomes normal. It is peace that becomes inherited. It is courage that no longer looks extraordinary because someone before made it possible to imagine. Chosen one, this is enough. You do not need to force another revelation. You do not need to manufacture another emotional peak. The message can become quiet now. The road in front of you is still incomplete. That is not a problem. You are no longer the person who needs an entire road before taking one faithful, responsible step. You have principles. You have discernment. You have the lessons of what failed. You have the wisdom of what survived. You have the freedom to learn as you move. You have permission to correct course without turning correction into shame. And you have the responsibility to leave something cleaner behind you. So go gently. Do not rush because you feel inspired. Do not delay because you feel afraid. Let clarity become action at the pace integrity can sustain. Let peace become something you practice instead of something you chase. Let your boundaries become quiet enough that they no longer require constant explanation. Let your work become deep enough that applause is optional. Let your relationships become honest enough that love no longer requires self-abandonment. Let provision become useful enough that abundance serves more than ego. And let the person who comes after you inherit evidence that you never had. You were looking for someone to prove the road existed. Now you understand. The road becomes visible because somebody walks. If that somebody is you, Then walk without needing to call yourself extraordinary every step of the way. Walk humbly. Walk awake. Walk willing to learn. Walk willing to stop when wisdom says stop. Walk willing to move when fear is the only thing asking you to remain. Walk in a way that makes the path safer, clearer, and more honest for whoever comes next. That is enough to make your life a precedent. May your discernment become cleaner than your fear. May your peace become stronger than your need for approval. May your relationships become places where truth does not have to hide. May your provision increase without becoming your master. May your mind become clearer without making you proud. May your voice become stronger without becoming cruel. May your boundaries protect love instead of replacing it. May your future become large enough that revenge looks too small to carry with you. May the years you once called wasted reveal what they taught, without requiring you to romanticize what hurt. May the doors that belong to you become recognizable. May the doors that do not belong to you lose their power to seduce you. May you receive correction quickly, wisdom gratefully, peace fully, and responsibility without running from its weight. May the people after you inherit something you had to learn the hard way. And when they walk farther because you walked first, may you understand that this was never about being above them. It was about making a road available to them. Chosen one, you do not need another precedent now. Become faithful with the step in front of you. Become honest with what you already know. Become responsible for what